Hello, everyone. This is Greg with the Spokane Walleye Club. I took a couple of recordings from a presentation that I delivered to the Walleye Club on January 31st, 2024. We're going to talk about fishing for walleyes in the wintertime. We're going to divide this presentation into two parts. Part one here, we're going to talk about walleye behaviors and what they're doing in the wintertime. We're also going to talk about where winter staging areas are in Lake Roosevelt in particular. And then last, we're going to talk about picking out features within these staging areas where active walleyes are frequently located throughout the winter months. So winter walleye, I'm going to talk about patterns that develop beginning as early as late November and going through the months of December, January, and February. Water temperatures during this time frame up in the inland Northwest are typically in the 30s and 40s. And we have water clarity that can be highly variable. We can have gin clear water during periods of dry and stable conditions, but the influx of rain water into the system, as well as mountain snowmelt, can produce muddy conditions in certain parts of the reservoir, which can really impact fishing. I've shown this slide before on several of my other videos that we've posted on behalf of the Spokane Walleye Club. And I like to use this to give folks an understanding of what walleyes are doing through the season. And a lot of it is dictated by two things. One, their metabolism, and two, movements that are dictated by staging for the spawn and spawning. So in this graph here, the warm colors indicate where walleyes' metabolisms are high when the water temperatures are warm. And the cooler colors are when the water temperatures are cooler and a walleye's metabolism slows, not just because of the water temperature, but there's also a little bit less forage in the system during that time of the year. So also like to break down and think about the yearly behavior as when walleyes are scattering in search of food when food is abundant in the system. There are still schools of walleye, of course, but there can be many different patterns where walleyes are feeding in a lot of different areas. During the winter time, walleyes a lot of times will be schooled up and frequently not in a feeding behavior, but that doesn't mean that the walleye does not feed during the winter time, especially the big females waiting for the spawn or preparing for the spawn will be eating from time to time. So December through February, we already discussed that the walleyes are schooled up frequently. We're going to discuss where winter staging areas are, but one of the big things that a walleye is doing during these cold water months is conserving energy. They're not moving around a whole lot, and when they are feeding, they're looking to feed opportunistically without expending a lot of energy. So Spokane Walleye Club, a lot of us are fishing on Lake Roosevelt. For folks that may not be very familiar with the area, Lake Roosevelt is in northeast Washington, and it is a huge reservoir. It's about 150 miles long that extends from the Canadian border to Grand Coulee Dam. And while there is abundant walleye within the system, the, the reservoir is not managed as a recreational lake. Its primary purposes are power generation, flood control, and irrigation. And I've highlighted flood control here because what happens to Lake Roosevelt through the season, and it begins late in the winter months, is uh, there are management techniques that are used to mitigate flood control for later in the season. And during the winter time, some of the areas that we're looking at as far as staging areas are some of the spots that I've indicated here in these yellow boxes. And these are areas that I've had success fishing in the cold water season. And I've also heard uh, other Spokane Walleye Club members having success in some of these areas. And some of these areas are also uh, pretty well known as being spots that guides take anglers in the wintertime to target walleyes. And one thing you may notice right off the bat is some of these areas are some of the wider parts of the reservoir, and I believe that is due to the fact that um, a wider part of the river generally has less current, and these wider parts of the river also have flats, humps, and other kinds of structure that can be used by walleyes to hunt and find food. I like to reference this map a lot. It's a Bureau of Reclamation map, and I've got a link to it here on the bottom. And it shows how the reservoir behaves in a flood control capacity. Uh, Out here in the Pacific Northwest, a lot of our water supply is from snow melt from the mountains of British Columbia and parts of Washington and Montana. So, beginning about late January and especially into February and March, we see uh, dam operators make more storage capacity for the reservoir by drawing the reservoir down. And this this graph here is interesting. I really like it. The red dotted line here is the average drawdown that occurs and how the reservoir behaves throughout the year. Last year, the previous year, is in the green dash line, which was 2023. You can see it followed some of the behaviors of the typical drawdown, but it occurred about 3 or 4 weeks earlier than normal. We had a very warm late March and April in the inland Northwest, and the snowmelt decreased earlier than we often see it. Typically, our drawdown is at its peak in early May. So I was going to show you some comparisons of what the lake elevation was on May 1st for the last 10 years. So I have those numbers here, and you can see that there are some big differences in how much or how little the lake elevation is drawn down by that time of the season. And you can look at 2018 and 2019 to see the two extremes over the last 10 years. And those numbers vary by 50 feet, which is a very significant number. And that 50 feet difference in drawdown, or just the drawdown differences from year to year, can have significant impacts on how the fish behave in the system. And the drawdown and when it begins also kind of ends the wintertime pattern that I'm going to discuss here. And why does the drawdown vary so much? Mountain snowpack I've already referenced. Long-range weather forecasts can have an impact on how the dam operators operate the drawdown. And in times, dam maintenance is performed and a drawdown is necessary to get that equipment maintained. But in general, by early May, Lake Roosevelt is often pretty close to 1250 feet of elevation within plus or minus 5 feet. And we can see that here. So for the majority of this presentation, we're going to be talking about November through early February. And this is a time when the lake elevation is typically pretty stable. There are some wiggles here in this graph, but in general, it's within 5 or 10 feet of full pool, and full pool is close to 1285 feet, give or take a couple feet here. So this stability it is a good thing for fishermen, having the lake level stable. Fish begin to set up in areas and stay there. And if you can have a full pool and stable conditions, the walleyes in Lake Roosevelt in the wintertime will begin to stage in areas similar to what I'm showing on this chart, where flats that are in the 20 to 35 foot range, the walleyes will visit these areas and cruise these locations looking for food. And they will occasionally relate to the break and drop into the channel into deeper water when they are not particularly active. And the fish that are up on the flats, in my opinion, tend to be the bigger fish in the system. Smaller fish are often found in deeper water during the wintertime. But if you begin the drawdown process, I have the dashed line here for what is represented as full pool in this image. Once the drawdown occurs, in my experience, as the water level begins to come down, most of the walleyes in the system begin to relate to other structure that is not up on the flat. And a lot of times it's breaks, edges of the channels, or alongside deeper humps within the reservoir. And that changes the walleye's behavior, and kind of the pattern that I'm going to talk about doesn't become nearly as effective. When the drawdown happens, you're reducing the capacity of how much water is in the system. So that also correlates to an increase in current throughout the system. And winter walleyes, being in energy conservation mode, may move off of structure that they've been relating to for months just because of the increase in current. So that can interrupt productive patterns as well. So back to the map, we're going to look at the most northern box that I have on this chart. This is the Kettle Falls area. From Kettle Falls northward to the Canadian border, the reservoir has a lot more river characteristics than lake characteristics. The channel is smaller. There are some flats and some humps in some areas, but in general, this is one of the higher current areas of the system. So this box here, it's pretty good indicator that there should be some walleyes in this part of the reservoir, because walleyes looking to escape that current will take refuge in this area here. Coming into a closer Google Earth satellite image here, this is a close-up of where Kettle Falls is. The community of Kettle Falls is down at the bottom of the screen. There's an all year-round open boat launch down here, as long as it's not frozen over. And this is where the majority of anglers will launch during the wintertime months. What other things you can see, other than it's just a wider system here, is the influx of the Kettle River here in the northern part, or the upper part of this image here. And some of the winter staging areas that are productive predominantly in the Pacific Northwest are often near confluences of two different water systems, and this area is no exception. I have the current of Lake Roosevelt denoted here in the white arrows, showing that the current comes from north to south. Taking a look at the bottom contour map to get a little bit better idea of what's going on here, you can see there is a significant difference in depth from where the main channel is that runs through here, and areas that are dominated by flats, secondary channels, and humps. And during the full pool time, a lot of these flats are in depths of anywhere from 40 to less than 20 feet. Here is the main channel, and the main channel is important because it provides deep water refuge for walleyes, and this deep channel has a depth of anywhere from 80 to about 100 feet in some of the deeper areas when the reservoirs hit full pool. This large area to the south, or to the bottom of the screen, is called Singer Bay, and the Kettle River comes in here at the upper left-hand corner of the map. Not only is the primary channel prolific in this area, but there are a lot of secondary channels. Before the river was dammed up with Grand Coulee Dam, there were numerous little winding channels in this area, and you can see those clearly on the map. And these little channels are also important, I believe, for walleyes to stage when they are not particularly active. They'll hang back in some of these deeper water pockets as well. Well, this is a big area, this Singer Bay, Kettle Falls area. It's a couple miles wide from north to south and encompasses many thousands of acres of water. So how do you break a place that this is this large down? Well, let's take a look at some of the features that can be attractors to walleyes and walleyes that are looking to feed. Humps, bars, and islands, especially those that are in the 20 to 30-foot depth range when the reservoir is at full pool. Those are spots that a lot of anglers are focusing on in the winter months. And I like to focus on these humps in that depth range that are relatively close to the deep channel, the main Columbia. Current seams are good places to look for walleyes year-round. If a walleye is relating to a current seam, they're usually there because they're looking to eat. Uh, the current can bring the food sources downriver, and if a walleye can tuck under a rock or find a current seam to stage in, they can just wait for the food to come to them. Current seams are often downstream of points. These can be terrestrial points or points that are submerged. Current seams can also occur around humps or sunken islands, and current seams can be in the bends, river bends of the channel, and primarily the inside bends often hold some of the most prolific current seams. Bottom transitions can be important places to check as well during the winter months. Bottom transitions are often areas that a lot of uh, fishing experts believe are spots that walleyes and other game fish use as highways to go from one spot to another. And this is kind of a year-round phenomenon. From Chuck, examples of bottom transitions are chunk rock to gravel or sand bottom, soft bottom to hard bottom, and weed bed edges. Even though the weeds may not be alive and vibrant during the wintertime season, that those decayed weeds can be an effective edge that game fish can relate to. So let's pick apart the map up around Singer Bay, and you can use these same tactics on other spots in Lake Roosevelt, whether it's the Two Rivers area at the confluence of the Spokane arm to the main Columbia, or whether you're talking about places like Bradbury Beach or even the Neighborly Cove area in Lake Roosevelt. Uh, you can use this kind of analysis of a map to find some high percentage areas even before you take the boat out on the water. So the humps, bars, and islands, I've circled some of those, and I picked ones that are relatively close to the main channel. So those are some areas that you can start your look to plan your fishing experience. Current seams. Current seams, you can a lot of times pick out areas on a map that should have some kind of current seam or back eddy on them just by looking at the way the channel behaves. There should be current seams up here where the main Columbia is constricted and then fans out. There will be current seams in this area up here, this highest point here, due to just the way the current splits going one along the shoreline and one down uh, the rest of the or down into the Singer Bay area. And not only where current breaks off like this, but also where current from one current direction merges with another current direction. You'll often find some back eddies and current seams in there. And I also have an area down here on the bottom. This is near the old Kettle Falls where the actual waterfall was before the lake was filled. This is an area that should have current seams as well. because a high volume area here is being constricted into um, a, a tighter channel uh, at this particular spot. Bottom transitions are a little bit harder to find on a topographic map, but you can take a look with your depth finder, your fish finder, for bottom hardness and things like that when you're out. But just from experience, there are spots here that are located near decaying weed beds and softer bottoms up here around the Marcus area, and also here in Singer Bay. These are spots that would be worthwhile looking at. There's also silt and residue buildup from the Kettle River dumping into the main Columbia up here on the upper left-hand corner of the screen. And down here on the bottom screen, this bottom circle here is an area that features a lot of really hard and rocky bottom next to sandy or gravel bottom. So those are spots that could be areas that will hold concentrations of fish as well. That's going to wrap up part one. We're going to talk about winter walleyes part two. We're going to discuss the jigging presentations of using blade baits and the traditional kind of jigs. So those are the presentations we're going to talk about. We're going to talk about the equipment that we use, like fishing rods and reels. And we're also going to talk about several other things, including environmental variables and how those can impact fishing. So resources that I've used here, I'll have listed, and you can take a look at some of those web addresses and use them yourself. Thank you very much. This is the end of our part one presentation.